I felt bad because I'd done Thoreau a double disservice. I'd made fun of him without much evidence. And worse, I'd woofed on his book, Walden, based only on a distant, fuzzy memory. There was but one way to make this up to him. I had to read his damn book. My copy was an old yellowing paperback, and it literally came apart as I was reading it. Influenced by the man himself, who read much into everything and never met a metaphor he could not expand into infinity, I kept thinking that this was symbolic, but it wasn't. It was just a cheap old book coming apart at the seams. I didn't mind the book. It sort of grew on me. It's a rather long book, and it took me quite a while to read it. Thoreau and I had our sessions. He was a muser, a very thoughtful person, exploring, as he put it, his own private sea, and his prose, given a morsel of any surmise, would swell immediately into dilatory discourse. I confess that I began to skim the text, especially after the middle and toward the end, a terrible admission, a lapse in manners that would cut the author to the bone. That would be like nodding off while listening to him, as he rattled on about his diet, the benefits of living an abstemious life, or patching clothes instead of buying new, listening to him speak in glowing tones about his beans and corn, and just dozing a little, and the irreparable breach incurred that would result in no more invitations to share his company. Poor old Thoreau, and when I say that, I mean it precisely. Though he lived to be just 44, he had an old soul, and I did feel sorry for him, how he would go on about his birds and trees and squirrels and muskrats and rabbits and woodchucks. Even his aunts at war, they were all his people, his community. And his pond, how he loved that pond, especially that pond, out of the several in the area. I was halfway through the book before I realized that he was that pond, in every fiber of his being. Small, deep, still, reflective, transparent, filled with all kinds of colorful life, and pure. Thoreau, being an idealist to the core, loved that word, pure, so clean and clear and absolute. Purity was something he savored and aspired to, something he found by that pond. Impurity, sensuality, was something he deplored, and it was flourishing everywhere outside his little harbor by the pond. When I first read the book, and didn't like it, I might have been put off by the first section, which is about economy, and which is lengthy, and amounts to a rant against his fellow misguided beings. Thoreau was a scold, a crank at odds with the world, and humanity was a vast disappointment to him, and he would be crushed if he could see it at work today. He abhorred the post office and the newspaper. What would he have done with the internet and cell phones? He worried about the hurry and waste of life, frittered away on useless details. He wanted simplicity and the bare necessities, and that's why he went off to his cabin in the woods, while the rest of the world went earnestly and rapidly away, hell-bent in the other direction. There, in the woods, like a hermit, he would live a life that was both extremely primitive and profoundly spiritual, doubly rewarding to him. He loved solitude, found it to be wholesome. It put him in the company of nature and his thoughts, which inevitably led him to the ultimate purity, the great artist and creator, God. He refers at one point, as if to another being, to the poor misanthrope and the most melancholy man, and that is indisputably him. His brother died when they were young men, cut himself while shaving, and contracted tetanus. I'm guessing it was a terribly painful death, excruciating, with a devastating effect on Thoreau, who could not save his brother or mitigate his suffering. After that, he was done with life's frivolities, exasperated by superfluity, deeply perplexed by the customs, traditions, and the so-called progress of his fellow creatures. Their lives were, to him, a form of madness. His life, to them, the same. Thoreau had a good sense of humor, which came as a surprise, when at times I felt I was reading a very droll Mark Twain. And he was enchanted by nature, from the star-filled sky at night to the booming ice on his beloved pond. At the end, in his conclusion, he goes all Polonius on his readers, preaching to them and providing fodder for many a high school graduation speech. Thoreau was a prophet that nobody wanted to hear. He was a voice calling in the wilderness, and if people did hear him, they possibly made a note of it, patted him, and moved on. I read that he was dying. He said, "Now comes good sailing." And something beautiful could be made of that, music swelling at the climax, his spirit exiting on a Viking ship. But then, unaccountably, he said, "Moose and Indian." That's Thoreau for you, pure and inscrutable to the end.